Great, thanks everyone. Welcome to the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee meeting on Monday the 9th of October at 11:33. I can remind everyone that meeting is being broadcast live and a recording will be available on the website following the meeting. And if I can request that all members have their cameras on so they're visible, but officers keep their cameras off unless they're presenting. So first item on the agenda is welcome and apologies. So welcome everyone. Liz, any apologies we need to note here?
Yes, we have Councillor Cunningham with us representing Councillor Stephen Thomas, Councillor Webber representing Councillor Andrew Morgan, and we have apologies from Mark Shepherd, Paul Orders, Ellis Cooper, James Williams, and Robert Dwyer and Ian Allwood.
Okay, right. Anything to add to that? Okay, the next item then is declarations of interest. Any interests that members wish to declare? If anything does come up during the meeting, then you're welcome to raise them with me and we can refer those to the monitoring officer. So item 3 then is the minutes from the meeting on the 11th of September. Is any questions around those, please? If not, is everyone happy to agree those as an accurate record? Right, which moves us then to item 4, which is the 23-24 month 4 budget monitoring updates and the 24-25 budget strategy. Who wants to start on this? Coming, Chris?
I think it'll be me, Chair, to take us through the report. Apologies, Chair, I don't know if it's my connection, but I seem to be having trouble, so hopefully you can hear me. The reason for this report is to update the Joint Committee in terms of the 23-24 month 4 position, but also to set out the CJC's proposed 24-25 budget strategy and timeline. The budget is being prepared, and in terms of approval, this needs to be approved no later than the 31st of January this year. In terms of some background to the report, I think section 6 of the report identifies that at its meeting earlier in this year in January, the CJC adopted a building foundations budget, essentially then approving a revenue budget of 255,662. And as part of this, the 23-4 budget included nominal sums to cover each of the CJC operational areas, the commencement of the work around the strategic development plan and the regional transport plan. In addition, it also included additional sums to build on the CJC standing orders and requirements. Therefore, as in previous years, the key aspect of the current year's budget really revolved around resources needed for CJC management and overheads required to support the CJC's overall governance and decision making. Table 1 of the report then sets out the position of the budget against the approved position as at month 4 of this year, so as at the end of July. And Table 1 summarises that at month 4, the revised budget amounted to 45,000 spend, which represent just under 18% of the approved budget. It is though projected that as month 4, the position is projected to fully spend during this financial year. And in terms of narrative to explain some of the key variances, these are included in paragraphs 11 to 20 of the report. Section 21 of the report then moves on to the CJC 24-25 proposed budget strategy. And subject to the successful completion of the lift and shift, 24-25 will represent the CJC's first full year of operation, where it seeks to bring together CCR and the CJC's new functions under the direction of a single independent legal entity. Ongoing budget discussions have focused on how we bring the two entities together and evolve these two funding programmes as a single entity from the 1st of April 2024. And the key principles which underpin the strategy have been discussed with leaders and other key stakeholders. Paragraph 26 of the report identifies the proposed strategy is being developed in 2 parts. The first part of the strategy will concern the existing base budgets. Those amount to around 3.18 million, and they will accommodate those areas that are picked up in paragraph 26 of the report and the key elements that need to be funded by those core budgets. The second part of the strategy then concentrates on identifying and costing the potential budget growth requirements for next financial year, particularly in respect of the SDP and RTP, Strategic Development Plan, and Regional Transport Plan. And in addition, the cost of setting up and servicing new subcommittees and other governance requirements. Early indications suggest that the additional growth requirement of those options range from, as paragraph 30 indicates, between 437 to 962,000, including sums, as I say, set aside for those areas. And ongoing options are being considered in terms of the funding of those growth items. Paragraph 31, for example, references ongoing discussions with Welsh Government on funding. Paragraph 34 of the report does outline that, as well as looking at 24-25, there is clearly an importance of developing our medium-term financial plan, and therefore work is ongoing in delivering and developing indicative revenue costs through from 25-26 through to 28-29, that 4-year period, and that again will be developed over the autumn period. Paragraphs 37 and 38 indicate our capital programme and treasury management requirements of the new entity as we pull all the practices together. And finally, from me then, just to essentially from a budget strategy perspective, really subject to the approval of this report, we will now prepare more detailed costings in terms of budget growth and requirements for next year. We'll provide further updates to the joint committee, and we will then seek to produce a budget report and approve that budget no later than the statutory deadline of the 31st of January next year. I wasn't going to say anything more at this stage. I think Ajinder is on the call as well, who's been doing a lot of work on the build-up of the budget work. So happy to take any questions along with Ajinder. Other than that, refer members to the recommendations at paragraph 48.
Great, thanks Chris, and thanks Ajinder also for your work on this. Any other comments, either Ajinder or members, or questions on this? Okay, if we're happy to move then to the recommendations at paragraph 48, as Chris said, it's recommended that South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee notes the 23-24 month for budget monitoring position and projected outturn position as set out in this report, approves the proposed 24-25 budget strategy set out in this report, which will allow detailed budget work to be undertaken over the autumn period, along with the appropriate consultation with constituent councils and the Ben Brechinnog National Park Authority over this period. And thirdly, notes that in line with the CJC regulations, the proposed 24-25 budget will need to be considered and approved no later than the 31st of January 2024. Have we got a mover and a seconder for those, please?
Happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett, Vale of Glamorgan Council.
Thanks, Liz.
Happy to second, Chair. Sean Morgan, Caerphilly Council.
Thanks, Sean. And then to take the vote on this, is Julian from the Brecon Beacons National Park present yet?
He is
I am
on,
present.
yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hunter. Apologies for being a bit late.
Morning, Julian. Okay, just wanted to check. I didn't want to inadvertently leave anyone out of the roll call for the vote. So yeah, the National Park first. Are you happy to approve?
Happy to approve.
Thanks, Julian. Vale of Glamorgan.
Yep, happy to approve, Chair.
Caerphilly.
Happy to approve.
RCT.
Approved, Chair.
Thanks, Maureen. Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
All right. Newports.
Agree, Chair, sorry.
Thanks, Jane. Barney Gwent.
Agree, Chair.
Helen. Monmouthshire.
Approved, Chair.
Thanks, and Torbine is approved. So that's carried. If we move then to item 5, which is the 23-24 annual business plan and the Q1 performance report.
Yep, I'll take this one, Chair. So good morning, everybody. So I'll keep this quite light because a lot of this detailed information is set out in the next report, which is on the transition plan. So this really reports against Q1 of the annual business plan, which is an integrated business plan, bringing together objectives for both Cardiff Capital Region City Deal and the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee. And this is really in line with the approach to delivering that single integrated form of regional public investment. So you'll see that the priorities set out in Q1 were quite straightforward. In relation to the SDP and the RTP, it was to make sure that we were complying with statutory objectives, notwithstanding some of the budget issues that Chris has just outlined in the Q1 budget report. It was to get the transition plan complete and to give effect to that target operating model, which has been done, to update the governance model in line with the interim constitution, which has been done. But clearly now, as we step up and as things get closer to lift and shift, the governance will need to be looked at again in light of the new partnership requirements and the statutory subcommittees. And lastly, it was to get some of the IT tools and technologies in place to give us assurance around the lift and shift process and to make sure the other end we can hit the ground running and be operational on day one. So as I say, Chair, all of those things are in place. The key area of debate, which we have a separate item on the agenda today, is around progress against the strategic development plan and the regional transport plan, because clearly that interfaces with some of the budget issues that the CJC board has to agree upon at a point in the future and before the 31st of January, as Chris Lee has just said. So the transition plan has got lots of different areas in it around people, investment projects, the transition of some of the big investment portfolios, corporate governance and finance, as well as engagement and communications. In a few minutes time, I'll give a much more detailed update on that when we go into the CJC transition plan. But I hope this gives confidence for now that we are on track. There are a number of complex things. Of course, there are a number of significant risks which we're always trying to mitigate, because essentially we are starting up a new entity here. So, of course, that's not without its challenges. But as I say, steady as she goes, we're making good progress, and I feel comfortable with where things are at this point. And on that note, Chair, I would commend the recommendations to you, which are set out at paragraph 11 of the report.
Thanks, Kelly, and that's a good point at the end there. Thank you to all the staff and everyone who's, you know, within the partner organisations for the amount of work that's gone into the transition. I know running sort of two organisations within parallel and doing that transition has been a lot of work, so that's appreciated. Any questions? If not, are we happy to move to the recommendations at paragraph 11, that we note the update in line with the integrated annual business plan for 23-24. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please?
Sean Morgan, Caerphilly Council, happy to move.
Thanks.
Liz Burnett, Vedic Glamorgan Council, happy to second.
Thanks, Liz. So if we go to the vote then, can I take National Park first?
Happy to agree, Chair.
Thanks, Julian. Vedic Glamorgan.
Happy to agree, Chair.
Great, Caerphilly.
Happy to agree.
Sean, RCT.
Agree, Chair.
Thank you, Merthyr.
Agree, Chair.
Newport.
Agree, Chair.
Thanks, Jane. Blaney Gwent.
Thanks, Chair. Agree.
Monmouthshire.
Agreed, Chair.
And Torbine agreed. So that's carried. So we move then to agenda item 6, which is the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee Transition Plan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report, as I've said, sets out the detail really in relation to the key elements of the transition plan. It's quite complex. Apologies, it's such a long report, but I felt it was important to get some of the detail in there to give you assurance that a number of different things are in train. And of course, there are some challenges, but I think this report is critical in setting out how some of those challenges are being mitigated. So since the setup of the CJC in its early form, the bare minimum, as we called it, we've been making progress. We're in the building foundation stages at the moment. So to date, we do have that important annual business plan, which is focused on the key elements of transition under that building foundations model. Work has been done to date to set up some of the key subcommittees, particularly around scrutiny, which still has to go through all 10 councils, I know, but we hope to bring that back shortly. The Standards Committee and the Audit and Governance Committee, and then key decisions on staffing matters, the first of which was taken in relation to my post back in May 2023. So as I've just mentioned on the performance report, we've got a number of work streams up and running. The first is on people, really important that we can get staff across to the CJC, we can pay them, pensions requirements are still in place and so on. Corporate and governance, which is the whole partnership structure, setting up of new subcommittees and ensuring we comply with the new statutory instruments. Then there's all the detailed work around finance and resources, which is a significant portfolio. Then work streams 4 and 5 really sit together on investments and project delivery and the subsidiary corporate structures like CCR Energy and CS Foundry Limited. And then there's the whole area of stakeholder engagement and communications, which is becoming increasingly critical. So the key milestones really through the transition plan, as I've said, are about ensuring that on day one, we can be operational. We did say originally we'd start to put some of those building blocks in place from the 1st of October. So if you like, the CJC would almost be in shadow lift and shift form at that point. So making sure that we've got all the registrations in place, that the entity could function properly in accordance with some of the key legal requirements and so on. And of course, I would take up position from that point in time, which would be significant in terms of giving the CJC a key point of contact. In terms of year one, then we'd be moving to fully functioning status from the 1st of April 2024, really ensuring policies and procedures were in place, all employees could transition. The CJC would be fully accountable for everything, not just CJC activities, but Cardiff Capital Region City Deal activities under lift and shift, and ensuring all of the projects, all of the portfolio sits as one. Of course, there's a future years dimension to this as well, because transition, isn't going to be done in the click of a finger. It isn't going to all happen on day one. So there'll be some ongoing work and some legacy issues for us to continue to grapple with. So each of the work streams you can see under paragraph 8, they're making good progress, as I say, steady progress. You'd be surprised that when you get into the detail, there are so many interdependencies and sequencing issues to have to think about. So the work stream on people is being led by Tracy Thomas, Chief HR Officer at Cardiff Council. Myself and James Williams were leading on corporate and governance, making sure that we've got that governance model in place, statutory subcommittees, that we can consolidate some of the committees that we have under City Deal at the moment, because we have far too many, and have a much more streamlined settlement. Finance, again, a really significant area that Harjinder is leading on, making sure that along with Chris Lee, the CJC Section 151 officer, we have the proper arrangements in place to administer the CJC's affairs. Then the work stream 4 and 5, which is on the portfolio transition and some of our subsidiary companies. Again, that's very complex because we've got to try and bring all of those vehicles over, align them with all the different tax implications into the CJC structure. And then the area that's getting ever more important, the closer we get to enacting lift and shift, is clearly the work that we have to do around stakeholder engagement and communications internally and externally. Internally more important at the moment, because as I say, from an outside world perspective, we want this to look seamless, which is going to be a very significant task. So really, there's a key set of decisions that we come to today. You can see from the weight of the agenda, there's the Constitution, the annual business plan, the proposed approach to delivering on the regional transport plan and the strategic development plan. But I think in terms of paragraph 11, just important to talk about this really, paragraphs 11 onwards. And this is about the City Deal funding award letter, the novation agreements. And we had a really good meeting with UK government and Welsh government just a couple of weeks ago, where it was quite clearly agreed that contracts could be novated across to the CJC. There's a bit of sequence to play out there in terms of when the CJC board makes the first decision about lift and shift and bringing across the joint working agreement into the Constitution. Then there's a decision for the Cardiff Capital Region City deal in terms of novating the funding agreement from Cardiff Council to the CJC. Then clearly the existing joint working agreement will have to be lapsed. And whilst this all sits within the competency of the CJC board and the Cardiff Capital Region Joint Cabinet, it's only right and proper that reports go into local authorities to make sure there's openness, transparency, and that the issue of lapse in the JWA is quite clearly on the agenda. So, Chair, I think we agreed that at a forthcoming briefing, we'll talk about these interdependencies, we'll talk about taking a joint approach and having some consistency in terms of the nature of the report that's taken into all 10 councils. So I just wanted to highlight lastly, because I won't go into all of the detail, you can see that set out in the appendices, but there are some key risks here to be very upfront about. One is on resources. You know, you've seen already that the budget for the transition process, you know, is slightly overspending. Yes, we've got capacity to address that, but it just goes to show the complexity and the interdependencies that are at play, you know, particularly around some of the financing issues, the specialist legal support that we need on aspects of this. There's quite a clear list of mitigations, but I think what's really important at the moment is we really step up our stakeholder communications, which will be really important when we get to the task of taking this through all 10 councils. So, Chair, I won't say any more because I'm conscious there's a lot of detail in this that needs to be carefully sequenced, particularly when we talk to the 10 councils. So I will leave you to look at the appendices and pose any questions as relevant and commend the recommendations to you, which are at paragraph 29.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Any questions, colleagues? The complexities of the work that's needed to be done, as Kelly said, the interdependencies of those bits of work and therefore the sequencing and getting that right is twists my brain. So yeah, again, thanks to the colleagues who've done the hard work on that, sort of dealing with the hurdles one by one. Any questions before we move to the recommendations? As Kelly said, they're on paragraph 29. It's recommended that we note the transition activities laid out in the reports and that we note the proposed approach to the novation of the City Deal Funding Award letter as laid out in paragraph 13 in Appendix 2, following that positive meeting with ministers. Are we happy to move that then?
Yeah, happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett, Vedic Glamorgan.
Thanks, Liz. And a seconder?
Happy to say again, Sean Morgan Caerphilly.
Thanks, Sean. If I take the vote then, National Park first.
Yes, Chair, happy to agree.
Gillian and Vedic Glamorgan.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Caerphilly.
Agreed.
Thanks, RCT.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
Newports.
Agreed, Chair.
Jane Blanagwent.
Agreed, Chair.
Monmouthshire.
Agreed, Chair.
And Torvine agreed. So that's carried. So we can then move on to item 7, which is the interim consultation.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I'm very pleased to present the interim constitution for the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee. So at the meeting of the CJC board on the 31st of January 2022, as members, you approved an interim set of standing orders, which was in line with the position of the CJC at that time, which, if you recall, which was just bare minimum operation. Now, as we work forward into the more complex technical matters of lift and shift and building the foundations phase, it's quite clear that that constitution is no longer enough. We need an interim constitution, which really gets us to the next phase of progress. You'll note in paragraph 5 of the key background, this isn't the final constitution that I was just talking about, which will see the terms of the JWA replicated within. That is to come in due course. This is one that really just gives the South East Wales CJC board the purchase to do what is required between now and that future point. So you can see that the interim constitution is appended to this report. It's quite detailed, 17 sections, 16 appendices that set out the very detailed procedure rules. We've reordered some of the text as well from the last set of standing orders just to make it much more readable. But very quickly, now there is a clear introduction. The membership has been expanded upon to deal with our colleague Julian Stedman representing Baina Burkiniog. Under meetings, you've got the different types of CJC meeting that can be called with the meeting procedure rules clearly set out. The statutory subcommittees, which form part of this interim operation of the CJC, they're the ones that I've just covered in relation to governance and audit standards. And of course, the scrutiny arrangements are still to be worked through. No other subcommittees at this time, because clearly we're still operating under the CCR City Deal model as well. And we'd have far too many subcommittees for us to be able to deal with if that were the case. That will be forthcoming, as I say, when we develop the final version of the Constitution. Arrangements under Section 6 for overview and scrutiny, which are important. As I said, we'll be reporting those back to the CJC board once they've been approved by all 10 constituent councils. Citizens' rights under Section 7, which is about public participation and transparency. And today our live streaming of this meeting goes some way to helping us to achieve that. The standards petition scheme under Section 8, Section 11, the key elements that have to be included in the budget. All matters around financial administration follow in Section 13. Section 14, interim arrangements for contracts and procurement. Section 15, staffing, which relates to the appointment of an executive team. Gets exciting at Section 16 because the CJC can have its own common seal. And then, of course, lastly, it's got to have a very transparent and up-to-date records scheme. So all of this will be very standard to leaders in local authorities. As I say, it's important to reinforce it's just an interim constitution. It is in the final version for lift and shift, but it really enables us as a staffing team to get on and implement that transition plan ahead of the 1st of April 2024. So, Chair, I will leave it there. As I say, everything's set out in a very detailed form underneath, but would commend the recommendations to you, which start at paragraph 35 of the report.
Thanks, Kelly. Any questions about that interim constitution? If everyone's happy, are we okay to move then to the recommendations at paragraph 35? There that we consider and approve the interim constitution and its appendices, Appendix A to the report, to replace the standing orders approved on the 31st of January 2022. That we note Section 6 and Appendix 7 of the interim constitution are subject to the 10 constituent councils of the CJC approving the terms of reference of the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee that will scrutinise the CJC. That we note the standard subcommittee arrangements set out within Section 4 and Appendix 4 of the interim constitution, that they're subject to the conclusion of a service legal agreement between the CJC and Cardiff Council, to be concluded under Office of Delegated Authority. And lastly, that we note that it will receive further updates and revisions to the interim constitution during 23-24 in order to allow for implementation of the preferred governance and delivery model. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please?
Happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett,
Thanks, Liz.
Morgan.
And a seconder if possible.
Happy to second, Chair. Sean Morgan, Caerphilly.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, if we move to a vote on those then, if I bring the Brecon Beacons National Park in first.
Happy to agree, Chair.
Thanks, Julian. Then Valley Glamorgan,
Agreed, Chair.
then Caerphilly.
Agreed.
Thanks. Then Barney Gwent.
Agreed.
Thanks. Newport.
Agreed.
Thanks, Jane. Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
Right, RCT.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Maureen. And Torvine's agreed. So that's carried. Okay, so we then move on to item 8, which is the pay policy report for 23-24.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my report again. As the Interim Chief Executive, I'm required to bring this pay policy statement in accordance with the requirements of the Localism Act of 2011. Pay policy, as you'll know from all your own authorities, has to be approved on an annual basis, usually has to be produced by the 31st of March this year, slightly late for us given where the CJC is at in its evolution, but in future years will be done by this date. So it's all pretty standard in relation to a transparent statement and policies relating to remuneration of chief officers on recruitment, any performance related pay, the use of bonuses, the approach really to payment of chief officers. And again, you know, there is only myself to worry about at the moment. Tracy Thomas has asked me to keep everybody informed that the only salary that's been agreed to date, it relates to me, the post of Interim Chief Executive. That's all been done through a 2p transfer, so there is no change there. Any changes that are made in the future in respect of my post or any member of a prospective executive team will have to come back and be reported separately as is appropriate in any event. So Chair, I won't say any more because I think it's all quite self-evident and self-explanatory, and would refer you to the recommendation at paragraph 13, which is for the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee to approve the attached pay policy statement, which is set out for you at Appendix 1.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Those of us from our constituent councils will know that, you know, the pay policies are, you know, the way that we try and keep an eye on sort of staff, you know, salary ratios, things like the gender pay gap and ratios between sort of medium and top pay. But in this case, it's a bit of a first sort of go with the formulation of the CJC. So there's not a lot to comment on really yet, is there? As you say, any questions, colleagues? If not, are we happy to move to the recommendations at paragraph 13 that we approve the attached pay policy statement at Appendix 1? Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please?
Happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett, Vale Glamorgan.
Thanks, Liz.
Happy to second, Chair. Sean Morgan, Caerphilly.
Thanks, Sean. So we'll move to a vote then. Brecon National Park.
Agree, Chair.
Great. Vale Glamorgan.
Agreed, Chair.
Right, Caerphilly.
Agreed.
Thanks. Blaenau Gwent.
Sorry, Chair, having trouble unmuting. Agreed.
Thanks, Anne. Newport.
Agreed.
Thanks, Jane. Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, RCT.
Agreed, Chair.
And Torvine. Agreed. So that's okay. So we then move to item 9 and the Regional Transport Plan Strategic Development Plan report.
I'll take this one, Chair, if that's okay. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll just talk through the content of the report, which was fundamentally to update the CJC board on the requirements and the timescales around about the RTP, the Regional Transport Plan, and the STP, the Strategic Development Plan. We're also looking for approval for the resourcing approach detailed in this report to enable us to move to the first milestones, and go into that more detail in a moment. In the report, paragraph 3 onwards sets the policy context here that Welsh Government has a vision for a strategic approach to land use, transport planning in a more joined up way. The notion being that that's tightly aligned to ambitions around economic development. So to that end, to be clear, CJCs are required by a statutory instrument to promote economic wellbeing, spatial planning and regional transport planning. And the guidance that was issued for CJCs focused on the statutory and constitutional arrangements as opposed to specific detail on the functions to be exercised. So pursuant to that, CJC is required to develop a strategic development plan and a regional transport plan following the publication of separate guidance for these non-concurrent duties. Just to mention also that both of these have a direct impact for colleagues in the National Park also, as they work across regions in that regard. I'll talk to the regional transport plan first, and you'll see the detail of this in paragraph 9 onwards of the report. So this is primarily the delivery mechanism to realise the ambitions of the Wales Transport Strategy, the National Transport Delivery Plan and the Regional Transport Plans, which will have a 5-year time frame. Detailed RTP guidance was received on the 13th of July of this year, and that sets out the approach that Welsh Government expects the CJCs to take in preparing RTPs. And the RTPs must consist of 3 elements. That's the RTP itself, a regional transport delivery plan, and an integrated wellbeing appraisal. The approach which we detail as part of the RTP is that within the guidance, we recognise that Welsh Government has identified 6 key milestones that they consider map out to produce the RTP by end of March 2025. The first milestone is the delivery of an implementation plan by the end of this calendar month, and hypothetically that will then trigger the release of funding from Welsh Government to support development of the plan. CCR has noticed that some of the other milestones are challenging, and so our team have identified that and worked with Welsh Government to how we can move those and how we can make those more manageable. That will be supported by Transport for Wales, whose resources and data will be made available to CJCs across the regions to support the delivery of the RTP. So the infrastructure team and Claire Cameron in particular will be leading the delivery of the RTP. It's proposed working closely with the RTA and local authority officers. Now, what we do recognise is that challenges exist around the medium to long-term delivery of the plan itself and the available budgets, and we'll come on to the resourcing proposal around about and the next steps around that in a moment. I'll speak next to the strategic development plan. That's paragraph 33 onwards. So our primary duty of the statutory power of strategic spatial planning is production of a strategic development plan. To be very clear, that has to set out an overall vision and strategy. Has to do other aspects such as identify a clear settlement hierarchy and strategic locations for future growth and change. It's a long-term plan. It has a minimum range of 25 years, and it's intended that the SDP will ultimately enable a more consistent, efficient approach to land use planning. It will also offer the opportunity to better plan and deliver regionally important strategic growth in a coordinated manner, particularly when it's aligned with the regional transport plan. So again, looking at our approach to this, I mean, to be very clear, it's not anticipated, and even with colleagues in Welsh Government, that an SDP would be adopted for South East Wales prior to 2029. One of the challenges we have that our local development plans therefore must be kept up to date. So we're working with Welsh Government, SOSPOG, SOPOS, the groups and across the region to understand how the STP can be delivered in alignment with LTPs as we move toward LTP lights ultimately as an aspect of the strategic development plan. So we're very much looking to support local authority colleagues. The first milestone for the strategic development plan is proposed to be the submission of a delivery agreement to Welsh ministers. That will be by end of this financial year, March 2024, and that the CJC demonstrate commencement of technical work on plan preparation. So that's a request around first milestone there. We understand that there's significant cost and resource involved in the STP development and delivery, and this has to be the subject and is currently the subject of discussion. To move to the proposal roundabout and resources towards the first milestones, which is paragraph 50 onwards. So as we said before, Welsh ministers will make available around about 125k upon delivery of an implementation plan. This would be supplemented by 50k from current year CCR budget. So that's all within current envelope. The CCR infrastructure team would be charged with delivery of the RTP, as we said before, working very closely with the RTA and local authority officers. But the focus for the moment is very much on that first milestone, and we'll come to that in a moment. In regards to the SDP, it's recommended, what we said here is that we would put out for expressions of interest for a part-time secondment to lead this work. We could offer that through South East Wales planning for us, such as SOSPOG and SOPOS, and that would put us on the front foot in that regard. And finally, it's very, very important to know that the CJC will be exploring these options in further detail over the autumn period in light of options and choices available. Central to our preferred way forward will be the ability to secure funding from Welsh Government as part of a mixed funding package to help deliver SDP and RTP requirements, and we'll continue dialogue with Welsh Government in that regard. So there's careful planning, careful sequencing is going to be needed in the coming months to ensure that the commitments that we enter to can be met for within the resource envelope. Pursuant to that, the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 66 are really to note the statutory powers which we've laid out, the associated duties and obligations in relation to spatial planning and regional transport, and just to approve the resourcing approach detailed in the report. That will enable us to then move forward to those first milestones, but also noting that per paragraph 61 of the report, this will form part of the budget planning for 2024-25, and we'll be revisiting the RTP and STP as part of this. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kelly. Kelly, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, if I could, Chair, because I think I just want to alert members to paragraph 49, the section on governance. And just to reinforce, as Colin has said, really, that this is about our early engagement in the SDP-RTP process. As Colin said, this is about first milestones in relation to an implementation plan. I just want to make it very clear to all members today that this doesn't tie you as members or individual local authorities in to a prescribed form of governance. You know, I know there was a model used back in 2019, but I think we're going to have to look at that again and just consider if it's fit for purpose in the light of the changes and the different context. And it doesn't tie us into a budget immediately, because we've said that that budget still has to be agreed over the coming weeks and months, and we're still exploring those options and choices. What I would say is that when we did have a meeting with a Deputy Minister about 2 weeks ago, myself, Councillor David and Councillor Morgan, it's pretty clear that there isn't a choice in relation to undertaking the RTP and the SDP. It was clearly stated this is a statutory requirement. You know, there is no flexibility on it. It has to be done. And when I pressed the issue of budget support, I think this is why it's so important now that this implementation plan at least goes in to be able to secure that. And when I asked about future funding, there was no actual commitment, but that I was clearly of the understanding that it was being given attention at this moment, and the issue of follow-on funding, you know, was clearly understood by Welsh Government. So it's a difficult situation where we're having to make some progress in order to qualify for the funding. And again, if we don't do that, we don't know what we'll get. So it's going through the motions at the moment, but I just wanted to be clear that in relation to both governance and the budget, it doesn't nail our colours to the mast, as it were. We've still got options and choices on that front to put to you as a CJC board. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Kelly. Any questions? Jane.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points. I welcome Kelly's comments there. I think they're really helpful, and that will help us going forward. I've recognised myself that the draft report that was intended for use in 2019 probably isn't fit for purpose any longer, and we do need to look at that and come to some agreement around the governance arrangements. My concern really is around what level of detail will be required within the implementation plans. Obviously, it's clear for us. The sooner we can put these plans together and submit them to Welsh Government, then obviously the sooner that unlocks funding, and it's funding that we're keen to secure. So I'm just looking for some assurance really along the level of detail that we're not tied into that. With the SDP, but I want to pick up a point as well on the RTP as well, if I may, Chair, in that the guidance is pretty specific in terms of some of the expectations of Welsh Government around this, but in developing that plan, and I think we'd all agree that because of the we've already got the committee established, it's working well, that we've made more progress on this. In terms of ensuring that we align our plan with the guidance. I think there's discussions there that are of such impact across the region that they need to be discussed in this environment and not at that subcommittee level. So I'm happy for this subcommittee to make recommendations, but I do not, having gone through the guidance, whilst there is some, particularly around the issue around disincentives for car use, I think there's a discussion to be had at this level around that, not for delegation to the subcommittee that we've got established. I think we should be happy to take their view and listen to their recommendations on that, but car user charging might work for the capital city. It's not going to work for other areas of the region, and we need to have an open and transparent discussion around that.
Kelly, I'll speak to the detailed implementation plan about suitable, and then
I'll
maybe
come back,
defer to you on the RTA point. Councillor Mudd, yes, on the implementation plan, so that relates to the regional transport plan, but in parallel, we'll be doing lightweight work on the STP, and from the aspect of starting to understand what kind of resources are involved as opposed to going into planning. The implementation plan for RTP, we're meeting with Welsh Government colleagues tomorrow, Christopher Warner, Matt Jones, particularly to say, look, this is what our implementation plan will consider. Effectively, what you're looking at, it's a plan for a plan for a plan. So it'll outline what kind of work packages would be involved, what kind of resources would be behind those work packages, so on and so forth. So it's a statement of how we would go about developing a regional transport plan, as opposed to any commitment to the content of that plan necessarily. As you say, the guidance that has been issued was fairly prescriptive, but even then what we found is there were milestones in there, as I mentioned before, that we didn't find were achievable. And Welsh Government colleagues were open to discussion on how we get to the required points. So hopefully that will give you some surety on the content of that. Kelly, do you want to speak to the point on the RTA?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Councillor Mudd's just raised some really interesting points, which shows that we've got some tricky times to navigate over the next few months in relation to both the regional transport plan, the strategic development plan, and the governance that sits around it. I suppose that the overall assurance, Councillor Mudd, sits in the fact that the CJC has to take responsibility, is accountable for all decision making on both the regional transport plan and the strategic development plan. The regulations are quite clear. It's one member, one vote. And for example, if the CJC board wanted to change the voting and have a weighted system of voting at CJC board level, difficult given there's only 11 members anyway, that would require unanimity. So, you know, that's clearly not going to happen if one or two authorities feel differently. Where you can influence things, where you're quite right, is on the system that you have for the operation of those subcommittees, albeit they can only make recommendations up to the ultimate decision makers. So around the subcommittee for transport and planning, there is a system that could be introduced there, albeit they can only ever make recommendations up to the accountable CJC board. So Councillor Mudd, I think what I'm going to suggest is that we probably need to have a conversation, perhaps a separate session on governance, partnerships, full stop, very, very quickly, because I think that's going to become a linchpin in terms of our ability collectively to make progress on these two items.
Thanks both. Any other questions, comments? If not, are we happy to move to the recommendations then at paragraph 66? That we note the statutory powers, associated duties and obligations in relation to spatial planning and regional transport as detailed in the Local Government Elections Wales Act 2021, and that we approve the resourcing approach detailed in this report to enable CCR to achieve the first milestones of the RTP and SDP, noting the position set out in relation to CJC's proposed budget strategy and medium-term financial plan as set out in paragraph 61. Are we happy to move and second those?
Happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett, Philip Morgan.
Happy to second, Sean Morgan.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, so I take the vote then. Brecon Beacons.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks. Vale Morgan.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Cathilly.
Agreed.
Thanks. RCT.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
Newport.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Blanagwent.
Agreed.
Thanks, and Torvine. Agreed. And I think there's a good sort of some points of action there following Joan's questions about setting up that discussion about governance and also that note that we want to try and discuss that at this level as much as we can going forwards. Okay, so item 10 then is the appointment of the interim monitoring officer. Kelly, is this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Just a very simple report which replicates the report that went to Cardiff Capital Region City Deal Joint Committee this morning. Our current monitoring officer, Cardiff's deputy monitoring officer, is leaving post to join Monmouthshire. And I'm sure you'd all want to join with me in thanking James for his enormous service to CCR in the time that he's been with us. It's a legal requirement for the CJC board to have a monitoring officer. So in the interim to appointing an executive team, my recommendation is to appoint a new locum monitoring officer for a 6-month period. We've gone ahead and interviewed a suitable candidate, Jane Lagrua. She's got an enormous amount of experience in both commercial, private law and working in the public sector for local government. So Jane is going to start on Wednesday of this week, actually. So the report really asks the CJC board to endorse this appointment in line with the required agreements we'll make with Cardiff Council and indeed the CJC legislation that requires it. So Chair, happy to commend those recommendations to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Any questions on these? If not, are we happy to move to the recommendations, which are at paragraph 15, that subject to recommendations 2 and 3 below the conclusion of the relevant legal agreements, that we approve the designation of Jane Lagrua as interim deputy monitoring officer of the CJC from the 11th of October and as interim monitoring officer of the CJC from the 1st of November, that we note that Cardiff Council will make the necessary arrangements to engage Ms Lagrua on behalf of the CJC, and that lastly we authorise the interim chief executive on behalf of the CJC to conclude or amend the service level agreement with Cardiff Council in relation to this matter. Is anyone happy to move and second that?
Happy to move, Chair. Liz Burnett-Vale of Glamorgan.
Thanks, Liz.
Happy to second.
Thanks, Sean. If we go to the vote, Anna Buckingham first.
Happy to agree, Chair.
Thanks, Julian. Vale Glamorgan.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Caerphilly.
Agreed.
Thanks, RCT.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Merthyr.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, Newport.
Agreed.
Thanks, Blanagwent.
Agreed, Chair.
Thanks, and Torvine. Agreed. That's carried, and that brings to an end the last of the agenda items. And you've got 4 minutes back of your day to get on with whatever work you want to, or make a cup of tea. Thanks everyone this morning, and see you all again soon, hopefully. Take care.
Bye all.